Jackson Winters took his usual shortcut through the abandoned industrial zone on his way home, the evening shadows stretching across the rutted path as he limped along with his cane. His mind was on nothing more than the frozen dinner waiting in his empty cabin when a movement near the town dump caught his eye. A skeletal figure, more ghost than animal, darting between the trash heaps. 3 months later, after coaxing the emaciated German shepherd back to health, Jack was carefully bathing the dog when his fingers found something embedded in the matted fur, a worn set of military tags, and a strange lump beneath the skin at the scruff of the neck. When the vet extracted a classified military microchip not registered in any civilian database, the discovery made Jack's blood run cold. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Riverdale, Pennsylvania sat like a forgotten footnote at the edge of the Allegheny Mountains. A town that had thrived during the Cold War when the nearby Army base employed half the population. Now, with the base abandoned for 15 years, the town survived on fading memories and the occasional tourist passing through to the hunting grounds beyond. The boarded storefronts along Main Street told the story of economic decline better than any census report. This was where Jack Winters had chosen to disappear after his medical discharge. At 42, the former Army K-9 handler walked with a permanent limp, a souvenir from his last mission in Afghanistan. His cabin, situated on 3 acres of woodland at the edge of town, kept him isolated from well-meaning neighbors and their uncomfortable questions. The nightmares still came 3 nights a week, leaving him sweating and disoriented in the darkness, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Jack's only regular contact was with Dr. Ellie Montgomery, the town's veterinarian whose father had served with Jack's unit years ago. Their friendship was built on mutual respect and unspoken understanding of loss. At 38, Ellie had inherited the clinic after her father's passing, choosing to stay in Riverdale despite offers from prestigious animal hospitals in Pittsburgh. "You're the only person more stubborn than me, Ellie," Jack often told her during their monthly dinners at the Riverside Diner. The town's long-serving sheriff, Tom Grantham, nodded respectfully when Jack passed but kept his distance. Most locals recognized Jack as that military fellow who occasionally helped with handyman work but otherwise kept to himself. Before his injury, Jack had been one of the Army's most respected K-9 handlers, with 3 overseas deployments alongside his Belgian Malinois partner. Rex, the IED that had ended his career, had also taken Rex, a loss that cut deeper than the shrapnel that shredded his left leg. Jack had sworn never to work with another dog, the pain of attachment too great to bear again. The industrial wasteland where he'd found the German shepherd had once been Riverdale Manufacturing, producer of military equipment and the town's largest employer. Now it served as an unofficial dumping ground, a place most locals avoided except when necessary. Something about finding the dog there, among the discarded remnants of Riverdale's military past, struck Jack as darkly poetic. 2 veterans abandoned and forgotten. The first time Jack spotted the German shepherd, he almost mistook it for a shadow moving between the rusted metal barrels. It was early November, and the evening chill had settled over the dump with a thin layer of frost. The dog was nothing but angles protruding ribs, sharp hip bones, and a spine that ridged prominently beneath its dull, matted coat. Its ears, once proud and erect, now drooped slightly, and its amber eyes darted frantically between Jack and the nearest escape route. "Hey there," Jack said softly, crouching despite the protest from his bad leg. The animal tensed, a low growl emanating from its throat as it backed farther into the trash heap. Jack remained still, noting the military precision in the dog's defensive posture despite its weakened state. This wasn't just any stray. Jack returned the next day with a plastic container of beef stew, his own dinner from the night before. He placed it on an overturned bucket and retreated 30 feet, settling onto another bucket to wait. For 45 minutes, Neither moved Jack patient, the dog suspicious. Finally, hunger overcame fear, and the German Shepherd crept forward, eyes never leaving Jack as it wolfed down the food in desperate gulps. "Slow down there, soldier," Jack murmured, recognizing the behavior of an animal that didn't know when its next meal would come. This ritual continued for a week, the dog gradually allowing Jack to sit closer each day. By day 8, Jack was within 15 feet when he noticed the animal's labored breathing and the unnatural way it held its right front paw. Concerned, he called the only person he trusted. "I need your professional opinion, Ellie, but it's complicated," Jack explained over the phone, his voice tense. "I can't bring the dog in. It's too skittish. Can you come to the old factory site? Dr. Ellie Montgomery arrived an hour later, her practical SUV loaded with supplies. She kept her distance as Jack pointed out the German Shepherd, now huddled beneath a collapsed sheet of corrugated metal. "My God, Jack," she whispered, raising her binoculars. "That dog is severely malnourished. I'm seeing possible infected wounds on the flank, and from the way it's breathing, I suspect pneumonia." She lowered the binoculars, her expression grim. "It won't survive another week out here, especially with the cold front coming." Jack nodded, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "How do we do this?" "I've brought a humane trap," Ellie said, "but I don't like using it unless absolutely necessary. It's traumatic." "For a normal stray, sure," Jack replied, watching the dog's alert eyes tracking their movements. "But this one, there's something different. The way it moves, how it assesses threats. It's been trained." The decision was made for them 2 days later when Jack arrived to find the German Shepherd collapsed on its side, its breathing shallow and rapid. Panic surged through him as he approached closer than ever before, expecting the dog to startle. Instead, it merely raised its head weakly before letting it fall back to the ground. "Hang on, buddy," Jack whispered, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "We're done waiting." What followed was a carefully orchestrated rescue mission. Ellie arrived with her assistant, a transport crate, and a mild sedative. Jack approached the weakened animal with slow, deliberate movements, speaking in the same commanding yet calm tone he'd used with military dogs. "I won't hurt you, soldier," he said, inching forward with a piece of hot dog containing the sedative. At ease. Whether it was the command, the tone, or simply the dog's depleted strength, it accepted the food without resistance. 20 minutes later, the sedative had taken effect, and they carefully lifted the alarmingly light animal into the transport crate. Under the harsh lights of Ellie's clinic, the German Shepherd's condition was even more shocking. Ribs and hip bones jutted like abandoned architecture beneath a dull, parasite-ridden coat. Scars crisscrossed its body, some surgical, others distinctly not. A deep, partially healed gash ran along its right flank. Severely malnourished, dehydrated, pneumonia, parasites, infected wounds, Ellie listed as she worked, her hands gentle but efficient. And look at these calluses on the paws, consistent with extensive training on varied terrain. She glanced up at Jack, who hadn't left the dog's side. "This isn't some family pet that got dumped. This dog has seen serious work." That night, Jack slept on the cold floor of Ellie's clinic, his hand resting near the kennel where the sedated German Shepherd lay connected to IV fluids. He'd named the dog Shadow, a temporary name, he told himself, until they discovered where it had come from and why it had ended up discarded like trash. Looking at the sleeping animal, Jack felt a connection he'd sworn never to allow himself again. "What happened to you?" he whispered into the dimly lit room. "And who the hell left you behind?" 3 weeks passed in a blur of medication schedules, hand-feeding sessions, and small victories. Shadow's pneumonia responded to antibiotics, and with proper nutrition, his frame began to fill out, though he remained severely underweight. The dog's behavior fascinated Jack. Despite his weakened state, Shadow maintained military-like discipline, sitting perfectly still during examinations, waiting for permission before eating, and responding to basic commands even though Jack had never trained him. "He's definitely had professional training," Jack told Ellie as they watched Shadow methodically eat his carefully portioned meal. "Look at how he maintains eye contact with the food but doesn't lunge for it. That's discipline you drill into working dogs." Ellie nodded, making notes on Shadow's chart. "His blood work is still concerning. There are markers indicating long-term stress and some compounds I can't readily identify. I've sent samples to a colleague at the university." It was during Shadow's first real bath, once his condition had stabilized enough, that Jack made the discovery. As he carefully worked medicated shampoo into the dog's neck, his fingers brushed against something metallic tangled in the matted fur. Gently separating the clumped hair, Jack's breath caught in his throat. Hanging from a broken chain were military identification tags, the engravings worn but still legible. CDR 7529 Sentinel, U.S. Army. "Ellie," Jack called, his voice tight. "You need to see this." Dr. Montgomery examined the tags, her expression puzzled. CDR must be an abbreviation for commander, probably his name. "But what's Sentinel?" "Could be a unit designation or an operation name," Jack replied, gently running his hand along Commander's flank. The dog leaned into his touch, a sign of growing trust that still surprised Jack each time. "I need to make a call." Captain Laura Simmons had served with Jack in his first deployment and now worked in administration at Fort Dix. Their friendship had survived his discharge, and occasionally she helped Jack navigate the labyrinthine military bureaucracy for fellow veterans. "I need information on a military working dog," Jack explained over the phone from Ellie's office. "Tags identify him as Commander. ID number CDR 7529, associated with something called Sentinel." The line went quiet for a moment. "That's odd. Jack, military working dogs have registration numbers that start with tattoo identifiers, not alphabetical codes like that. Let me check some databases and call you back." 2 days later, Laura called back, her voice unusually cautious. "I found your dog. Jack, Commander was an elite explosive detection dog assigned to the 87th Engineering Battalion. According to records, he was killed in action 14 months ago in a training accident." Jack glanced through the office window to where Commander lay on a pad in the reception area. "Well, he looks pretty alive to me. Laura, malnourished and abandoned, but definitely breathing." "That's not all," Laura continued. "When I tried to access his complete service record, I hit a wall. Parts of his file are classified, including details about this Sentinel designation. Even with my clearance, I couldn't get in." "A classified service dog?" Jack frowned, the familiar prickle of suspicion crawling up his spine. "It gets stranger. I asked around discreetly, and there are rumors that several military working dogs went missing around the same time. Official records show them as deceased, but no bodies were ever processed through normal channels." After ending the call, Jack sat silently for several minutes, processing the information. Commander, not Shadow. He reminded himself had been reported dead, but was very much alive. His service record was partially classified, and other dogs had similarly vanished. Jack drove to the Riverdale Sheriff's Department that afternoon, Commander secured in the back seat of his truck. Sheriff Tom Grantham listened politely to Jack's concerns, but shook his head before Jack even finished. "Let me get this straight," Grantham said, leaning back in his chair. "You found a stray dog that you think is actually a military dog reported deceased, and you want me to—" "What exactly?" "Open an investigation into military record keeping." "Into animal abuse at minimum," Jack insisted. "Someone starved this dog and left him for dead." Grantham's expression softened slightly. "Look, Winters, I can see you're concerned, and it's admirable you've helped the animal. But this town has real problems: the opioid crisis, break-ins at the pharmaceutical warehouses, domestic violence calls. I can't allocate resources to investigate why a dog ended up at our dump." Jack left the sheriff's office with Commander, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. In the parking lot, he noticed a black SUV with government plates, the driver watching him intently before pulling away. That evening, Jack sat on his cabin porch with Commander resting at his feet, the dog's head occasionally lifting at distant sounds. The military tags hung from Jack's hand as he turned them over repeatedly, studying their worn surface. "Someone wanted you gone," he said quietly to Commander. "The question is why?" His cell phone rang, the screen showing an unlisted number. When Jack answered, the line remained silent for a moment before a voice deliberately disguised by what sounded like a voice modulator spoke. "Stop asking questions about the dog. Winters, it's been written off. Let it stay that way." The call ended before Jack could respond. He stared at the phone, then at Commander, who had raised his head and was watching Jack intently. "Looks like we've got someone's attention, boy." The next morning, Jack drove to the public library and used their computer to search military news archives from 14 months ago, around when Commander had reportedly died. He found nothing about training accidents involving military dogs, but did discover an article about a military transport carrying sensitive equipment that had crashed near the Pennsylvania-New York border, with all personnel reported safe. On the drive home, Jack noticed the same black SUV following at a discreet distance. Instead of returning to his cabin, he drove to Ellie's clinic, where he found her examining Commander's latest blood work. "Jack," she said as he entered, her expression troubled. "The lab found something unusual in Commander's blood, traces of an experimental sedative compound that was being developed for military use but never officially approved." She looked up at him, concern etched in her features. "What exactly have we gotten ourselves into?" Jack glanced out the window, noting the black SUV now parked across the street. "I don't know yet," he answered, "but I intend to find out even if someone doesn't want me to." Jack's investigation into Commander's history began with a call to his former Army buddy, Mike Townsend, who had transitioned to training police K-9 units after his discharge. After explaining the situation, Jack emailed photos of Commander and the tags. "Those are definitely specialized tags," Mike confirmed over the phone the next day. "Standard military working dogs have regular identification, but these custom tags with the Sentinel designation suggest a specialized unit. From the training markers, I can see in your photos the way he holds his stance. Even his eye movements. This is a high-level detection dog, Jack. Not your average bomb sniffer. This boy was elite." "Any idea why someone would report him dead and then abandon him?" Jack asked, watching as Commander methodically explored the perimeter of the cabin's living room, his movements deliberate despite his still recovering body. "Two possibilities," Mike replied. "Either Commander failed at something critical and instead of rehabilitation, someone decided to cut corners and dump him, or—" Mike paused. "He saw something he shouldn't have." The thought had already crossed Jack's mind. Military working dogs weren't just tools, they were witnesses. A dog like Commander would have been present during classified operations, training exercises, and private conversations. Dogs observed everything. Jack's next step was meeting Sarah Wilson, a veterinary technician who specialized in military working dog rehabilitation at a center 2 counties over. Ellie had arranged the meeting, vouching for Jack with her professional reputation. Sarah was a petite woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, her light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She examined Commander thoroughly while Jack explained the circumstances of finding him. "These scars along his flank aren't from abuse or neglect," she observed, her fingers gently tracing the marks. They're surgical. And these calluses on his paws, she lifted Commander's front paw, are consistent with extensive training on various surfaces, including metal grating and concrete. Expensive training. She stood and crossed to her desk, pulling up files on her computer. Military dogs are designated with specific codes based on their training specialties. From what I'm seeing, your boy was likely an EFDD, Enhanced Explosive and Firearms Detection Dog. They're trained to detect not just standard explosives, but also weapons, ammunition, and components. Enhanced how? Jack asked. They're selected for exceptional olfactory sensitivity and trained using advanced techniques, Sarah explained. These dogs can detect concentrations as low as parts per trillion. They're invaluable for finding weapons caches in war zones that other detection methods miss. On the drive back, Jack's mind drifted to his own military service. His last mission, the one that had cost him his leg and his K-9 partner Rex, had been a supposed routine sweep for weapons in an abandoned compound. They'd been assured the site was clear, but the IED they'd missed had suggested otherwise. The intelligence had been wrong, or someone had lied. As Jack pulled into his driveway, Commander suddenly grew alert in the passenger seat, a low growl building in his throat. Jack scanned the tree line, noticing subtle signs of disturbance: a broken branch, disturbed leaves. Someone had been near his cabin. Inside, nothing appeared touched. But Jack's instincts, honed by years in hostile territory, told him otherwise. He did a methodical sweep and found what he was looking for, a small listening device tucked beneath his kitchen table. Without touching it, Jack backed away, took Commander's leash, and left immediately. That evening, they stayed at Ellie's clinic. Jack didn't explain why, and she didn't ask, merely providing him with coffee and a place to think. "I need to look into recent military activities near Riverdale," Jack told her. Specifically around the time Commander would have gone missing. Ellie hesitated, then said, "You should talk to Frank Miller. He's a local hunter who knows every inch of these woods." About a year ago, he was complaining about being run off from his favorite hunting grounds by military personnel conducting what they called training exercises near the old base. The following morning, Jack drove to Miller's modest cabin at the edge of the national forest. Frank Miller was a grizzled man in his 60s with a perpetual scowl and a deep distrust of government. He eyed Jack suspiciously until Commander emerged from the truck. "Military dog," Miller observed immediately. "Working line, not some backyard breeding." "You've got a good eye," Jack replied, explaining his background as a handler. Miller's posture relaxed slightly. "What brings you out here? Then—" "I'm trying to understand what happened to this dog. I found him half dead at the dump, but records say he died in service over a year ago." Miller snorted. "Wouldn't be the first lie from that bunch." He glanced around before continuing. "October last year, I was hunting my usual spots when I came across a temporary camp about 12 miles northeast of the old base. Military vehicles. Guys in unmarked fatigues. They claimed it was a training exercise and forced me to leave. But training exercises have proper markings, proper protocols." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "Did you see any dogs?" "Heard 'em," Miller confirmed. "Barking coming from one of the larger tents. When I mentioned it, the officer got real interested in how long I'd been standing there and what else I'd seen." "Did you report this?" Miller gave him a look that suggested Jack might be naive. "To who, Sheriff Grantham? He'd tell me to mind my own business. Besides," he added, glancing at Commander, "I value my peaceful existence." As Jack prepared to leave, Miller added, "I filed the encounter away as strange, but didn't think much more of it until about a month later when I found shell casings near the site, not military issue. I've been hunting long enough to know the difference between standard ammunition and something specialized." Jack thanked Miller and left with another piece of the puzzle, but the larger picture remained frustratingly unclear. He needed more. Back at Ellie's clinic, Jack found her examining the latest round of Commander's blood work, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The university lab found something unusual," she said without preamble. "Trace amounts of a synthetic compound similar to certain nerve agents, but modified. It's designed to degrade rapidly in the bloodstream, which is why it's barely detectable now." Jack felt his stomach tighten. "Someone tried to poison him?" "Not necessarily with lethal intent," Ellie clarified. "The concentration suggests it was meant to incapacitate, not kill, like they wanted him immobilized but alive." "Why would—" Jack began, but was interrupted by the clinic's front door chime. A man in his mid-40s entered, his posture and haircut immediately identifying him as military to Jack's experienced eye. He smiled pleasantly at Ellie. "Dr. Montgomery, I'm Sergeant Marcus Reynolds. I understand you've been treating a German shepherd that might be military property." Jack stepped forward, subtly positioning himself between Reynolds and the back room where Commander was resting. "The dog was abandoned and malnourished when I found him." Reynolds shifted his attention to Jack, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Winters, Jackson." "Winters. I thought you looked familiar." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "We never met directly, but I knew your commanding officer in Afghanistan. Small world." "Isn't it?" Jack replied, maintaining eye contact. "What's your interest in, Commander?" "Commander, is that what the tag said?" Reynolds sounded genuinely curious. "I'm with a recovery unit tasked with locating missing military assets. Several working dogs were lost in a transport incident last year. We've been trying to recover them." He withdrew an official-looking document from his jacket. "This is authorization to reclaim any identified military working dogs. They remain property of the U.S. government." Ellie stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "With all due respect, Sergeant, this dog is currently under medical care. He was severely malnourished, had pneumonia, and is still recovering from what appears to be negligent treatment." She took the document but didn't open it. "I'll need to consult with the State Veterinary Board before releasing any animal in my care, particularly one that shows signs of abuse." Reynolds's pleasant expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Doctor. I wouldn't want to interfere with proper procedure. I'll check back in a few days." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "Winters, good to finally meet you. Your reputation precedes you." The door closed behind him with a decisive click. As soon as Reynolds was gone, Jack moved to the window and watched the sergeant climb into a black SUV, the same one Jack had noticed following him earlier. "I don't like this," Jack muttered. "A year after Commander supposedly dies, suddenly the military wants him back." That night, Jack awoke to the sound of breaking glass. He was on his feet instantly, the habits of war still ingrained in his muscles despite years of civilian life. Someone was in the clinic. He could hear Commander's low warning growl from the kennel area, moving silently through the darkened hallway. Jack spotted a figure in black attempting to open Commander's kennel. Without hesitation, Jack tackled the intruder, driving him into the wall. A brief, violent struggle ensued before the man broke free and escaped through the broken window. When Sheriff Grantham arrived 30 minutes later, his expression was grim as he surveyed the damage. "You're telling me someone broke in specifically to steal a dog?" "Not just any dog," Jack insisted. "A highly trained military dog that officially doesn't exist anymore." Grantham sighed heavily. "Winters, I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt here, but this sounds like paranoia. Why would anyone care this much about a stray you found?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Jack replied. The break-in forced Jack's hand. He couldn't leave Commander at the clinic, and his own cabin had been compromised. They needed somewhere secure while he continued investigating. Ellie offered her family's hunting cabin, unused since her father's passing. "It's off the grid, no electricity except a small generator. No phone lines. It's not in my name. It's still listed under my father's corporation. No one would connect it to me, or to you." The following day, Jack relocated Commander to the hunting cabin deep in the Pennsylvania woods. As he settled in, he spread out everything he'd learned on the cabin's rustic dining table: Commander's tags, notes from his conversation with Mike and Sarah, Frank Miller's account of the mysterious camp, and Ellie's blood work findings. The pieces were there, but they weren't connecting. What made Commander valuable enough to fake his death, then attempt to reclaim him a year later? Why had he been abandoned at all? And how did Sergeant Reynolds fit into the picture? Jack's phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Check Commander for more than just the chip." The message sent a chill down Jack's spine. How did anyone know about the microchip Ellie had found, and who was texting him under the warm light of a kerosene lamp? Jack carefully examined Commander, his hands gently probing beneath the now healthier coat. The dog remained perfectly still, his training evident in his cooperation. Near the base of Commander's tail, Jack felt a small, hard lump beneath the skin, different from the microchip Ellie had detected in his neck. "There's something else here, boy," Jack murmured. "Something someone wants badly enough to break into a veterinary clinic for." Commander turned his head to look at Jack, his intelligent eyes seeming to convey understanding. For the first time, Jack wondered if Commander hadn't been abandoned at all. Perhaps he had escaped, running not from danger, but toward something or someone who could help expose whatever secret he had witnessed. "What did you see, Commander?" Jack whispered. "And why are they so afraid of you being found?" The hunting cabin served as their sanctuary for 3 days, while Jack planned his next move. Commander's strength improved daily, his ribs less prominent, his coat beginning to regain its healthy sheen. Jack adhered to a strict military working dog feeding and exercise schedule, and Commander responded to the structure with visible improvement in both physical condition and alertness. On the 4th morning, Jack decided to test a theory. Using techniques from his handler training, he laid out various items on the cabin floor: a piece of cloth, an empty shell casing Frank Miller had given him, a fragment of metal from the old base, and Sergeant Reynolds' business card left at the clinic. "Commander, find," Jack instructed, using the universal search command for military dogs. Commander immediately began methodically moving between the items, his nose working with precision. When he reached Reynolds' card, he sat abruptly, staring at it and then looking up at Jack, the classic indication behavior of a detection dog. "Good boy," Jack praised, his suspicions confirmed. Commander recognized something about Reynolds, either his scent or something on the card itself. Later that morning, Jack drove to the coordinates Frank Miller had shared, leaving Commander safely secured at the cabin. The site of the alleged training exercise showed little evidence of activity a year later, but Jack's trained eye noticed subtle signs: areas where vegetation growth patterns were interrupted, suggesting heavy equipment had been placed, remains of a fire pit carefully dismantled but still discernible to someone who knew what to look for. As Jack circled the perimeter, he discovered a worn path leading away from the main area. Following it, he came across a small clearing where the ground had been disturbed in a regular pattern. Jack crouched to examine the soil more closely, his fingers brushing against something metallic. Digging slightly, he unearthed a brass shell casing unlike standard military-issue specialized ammunition, just as Miller had described. A twig snapped behind him, and Jack spun around to find himself face to face with a security guard in unmarked tactical gear. "This is private property," the man stated flatly, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. "You need to leave immediately." "Didn't realize the national forest had been privatized," Jack replied evenly, slowly standing. "This section is leased by Northeast Security Consultants for training purposes," the guard explained with practiced ease. "All proper permits are filed with the Forestry Service." Jack nodded as though accepting the explanation. "Sorry for the intrusion. I was tracking a deer." The guard's eyes flicked to Jack's empty hands. No rifle in sight. Without a weapon. Lost my shot earlier. Thought I might find where it went down. The guard clearly didn't believe him, but seemed content to simply remove Jack from the premises. I'll escort you back to the main road. As they walked, Jack casually asked, Northeast Security, are you folks former military? Many of us, the guard acknowledged stiffly. We provide specialized training services, including K-9 units, Jack pressed. The guard's step faltered momentarily. We work with various tactical specialties. At the Forest Access Road, the guard stopped. I'd advise against returning to this area. Mr. Winters, Jack supplied. Jackson Winters. Something flickered in the guard's eyes, recognition, possibly concern. As I said, Mr. Winters. This area is restricted. Next time, there will be consequences. Driving back toward Riverdale, Jack noticed a familiar black SUV pull onto the road behind him, maintaining a consistent distance. Instead of returning to the cabin, he drove directly to the sheriff's department, parking prominently in front. The SUV continued past without stopping. Inside, Jack insisted on speaking with Sheriff Grantham directly, presenting the shell casing he'd found. This isn't standard ammunition, Jack explained. It's specialized, possibly armor-piercing. Not something hunters use, and not standard military issue either. Grantham examined the casing with a frown. Where did you get this? National Forest, about 12 miles northeast of the old base. There's a supposedly private training facility there run by something called Northeast Security Consultants. Grantham's frown deepened. Never heard of them operating in my county. He turned the casing over in his hand. I'll look into this, but Winters, he fixed Jack with a stern gaze, don't go playing detective. These types of operations often have federal connections. You start poking around. You could interfere with something bigger than a missing dog. Jack left feeling simultaneously validated and warned off. Grantham hadn't dismissed his concerns outright this time, but the sheriff's caution about federal connections echoed Jack's growing suspicions. Back at the cabin, Jack found Commander unusually agitated, pacing and whining softly. As Jack approached, the dog suddenly stiffened, then collapsed, his body convulsing violently. "Commander!" Jack rushed to the dog's side, his heart hammering as he tried to hold the thrashing animal steady to prevent injury. The seizure lasted nearly 2 minutes before Commander went limp, his breathing rapid and shallow. Jack frantically called Ellie, who arrived 40 minutes later with her emergency kit. "His pupils are dilated, heart rate elevated," she reported after a quick examination. "When did this start?" "Just before I called you. He was fine this morning." Ellie drew blood samples and administered medication to prevent further seizures. "This isn't typical for recovery from malnutrition or pneumonia. Jack, something else is happening." She looked up at him, her expression grave. "Did you change his food? Give him anything new?" Jack shook his head, then froze. "The water. I refilled his bowl from the stream this morning instead of using bottled water." Ellie immediately collected a sample of the stream water while Jack watched over Commander, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep. When she returned, her expression was tight with concern. "I can't test this properly here, but I'm seeing an oily residue that shouldn't be present in a forest stream." She packed the sample carefully. "I need to get this to my lab, and these blood samples need to go to the university. Something's very wrong." Jack carried Commander to Ellie's SUV, the dog's substantial weight now concerningly light despite weeks of proper nutrition. At the clinic, Ellie connected Commander to monitoring equipment while Jack paced anxiously. "What if it's not environmental?" Jack finally voiced his darkest fear. "What if someone deliberately poisoned him?" "Let's not jump to conclusions until we have the test results," Ellie cautioned, though her worried expression betrayed her own suspicions. The call came at midnight, not from the university lab, but from Sarah Wilson, the veterinary technician specializing in military working dogs. "The blood sample you sent shows traces of a compound called XR17, she explained without preamble. It's a specialized incapacitating agent developed for military use against enemy K9 units. It's designed to trigger neurological symptoms that mimic a natural illness but eventually prove fatal without the antidote." Jack's blood ran cold. "How long?" 72 hours from exposure to irreversible damage. Maybe less given his compromised health status. "And the antidote?" "That's the problem," Sarah replied grimly. "It's a compound called pralidoxime variant, not available commercially. It would only be stocked at specialized military veterinary facilities or research centers that work with these agents. Where's the nearest one? Officially Fort Detrick in Maryland. But realistically, if someone used XR17 locally, they have the antidote nearby. No one deploys these agents without having the countermeasure on hand." Jack thanked her and immediately called Ellie, who had gone home for a few hours of rest. "We need to find whoever poisoned him," Jack said after explaining the situation. "They'll have the antidote." "Jack, this is serious," Ellie responded, her voice tense. "If they're using military-grade poisons, they're not going to hesitate to use them on people who interfere. I don't have a choice. Ellie, Commander's dying." After hanging up, Jack sat beside Commander's kennel, gently stroking the sleeping dog's head. "I'm not losing another partner," he whispered. "Not like this." The next morning, Jack convinced Ellie to stay with Commander while he pursued the only lead he had: Northeast Security Consultants. Using his old military contacts, he obtained an address for their regional office, a nondescript building in an industrial park 30 miles away. Jack surveyed the facility from a distance, noting the security cameras and access control systems. Breaking in would be nearly impossible. And even if he succeeded, he had no way of knowing where to find the antidote or if it was even kept there. He needed another approach. Returning to his truck, Jack made a call to Captain Laura Simmons. "I need everything you can find on Project Sentinel and Northeast Security Consultants," he said without greeting. "Commander's been poisoned with something called XR17. He has less than 72 hours. "Jack, I can't just—" "Laura, he was deliberately poisoned to keep him quiet. This isn't about a lost military dog anymore. Someone's covering up something bigger, and they're willing to kill for it." There was a long pause before Laura responded. "I'll see what I can do. But Jack, be careful. If this goes as deep as you think, these aren't people who play by the rules." While waiting for Laura's information, Jack returned to the clinic to check on Commander. The dog was awake but subdued, his normally alert eyes glazed with pain. Ellie had set up a constant IV drip to manage the symptoms, but it was merely buying time. "His condition is deteriorating," Ellie reported quietly. "The seizures are becoming more frequent even with medication." Jack knelt beside Commander, who weakly lifted his head in recognition. "Hang on, boy. I'm going to fix this." Laura called back that evening. "Jack, I found something. Project Sentinel wasn't just a K9 unit. It was a specialized team tasked with detecting illegal weapons sales within military channels. The dogs were trained to identify not just weapons and explosives, but specific chemical signatures associated with black market manufacturing." Who was in charge? That's where it gets interesting. The project was officially under Colonel James Harrington, but day-to-day operations were supervised by— She paused. "Sergeant Marcus Reynolds." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Reynolds, the same Reynolds who's trying to reclaim Commander. One and the same. And Jack, there's more. 3 months before Commander supposedly died, Reynolds was quietly removed from the project and placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The investigation was suddenly dropped, and he was honorably discharged shortly after. Jack's mind raced, connections forming rapidly. What happened to Colonel Harrington? He died in what was ruled an accidental drowning at his lake house 1 week before Commander's reported death. "This isn't about a dog, Laura," Jack said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Commander was a witness, and now I need to find that antidote before he dies for real this time." The sun had barely risen when Jack received another call from Sarah Wilson. Her voice was tense, professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency that immediately put Jack on alert. "I've been reviewing Commander's blood work more carefully," she said without preamble. "The poison is acting faster than I initially calculated. The degradation of his neural pathways has accelerated. I don't think he has 72 hours. It's more like 36, maybe less." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "Are you certain?" "His previous malnutrition and pneumonia weakened his system. The poison is taking advantage of that." Sarah paused, and Jack could hear her shuffling papers. "There's something else. I've been making calls to contacts at other military veterinary facilities. There's been a pattern of requests for pralidoxime variant across the Mid-Atlantic region, all through Northeast Security Consultants. Officially, they're conducting training exercises on antidote deployment." "That can't be coincidental," Jack said, watching through the window as Ellie adjusted Commander's IV drip. The once powerful German shepherd lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "It's not," Sarah confirmed. "And Jack Reynolds was the one who signed for the latest requisition 3 days ago at their facility in Riverdale." The countdown had officially begun. 36 hours to find the antidote, likely in the possession of the very people trying to ensure Commander never recovered. Jack spent the morning gathering information on Northeast Security Consultants' local operations. Using Frank Miller's description of the location and satellite images Laura had sent, he identified what appeared to be their main training compound, a cluster of buildings partially hidden in the dense forest, accessible only by a single access road. As he finalized his reconnaissance plan, Sheriff Grantham unexpectedly arrived at the clinic, his expression grave. "I checked into that shell casing, Winters," he said, stepping inside and removing his hat. "It's specialized ammunition manufactured for private military contractors, not available to civilians or standard military units." He glanced toward the treatment area where Commander lay. "How's the dog?" "Dying," Jack answered bluntly. "Someone poisoned him with a military-grade toxin." Grantham's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact. We have the blood work to prove it." Jack hesitated, then decided to trust his instincts about the sheriff. Commander was part of a specialized military unit that detected illegal weapons sales. His handler died under suspicious circumstances. Commander was reported killed in action but somehow escaped. And now someone is determined to finish the job. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, studying Jack with evaluating eyes. "You know how this sounds, right? Like the paranoid delusions of a damaged veteran." Jack smiled humorlessly. "Yeah, I know exactly how it sounds. But that dog is dying because he knows something, or saw something, that someone wants to keep quiet." Grantham sighed heavily. "I'd like to help, Winters, but this is beyond my jurisdiction. If what you're saying is true, this involves federal crimes, military contractors, and God knows what else. All I'm asking is that you don't interfere," Jack replied. "I need to find the antidote, and I have about 30 hours to do it." The sheriff placed his hat back on his head. "I didn't hear that. But I should warn you, I received a call this morning from the FBI. Agent Trevor Blackwood is arriving today to investigate reports of stolen military property. He specifically mentioned you." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The noose was tightening. After Grantham left, Jack briefed Ellie on the deteriorating situation. Her face paled as she realized the implications. "Jack, you can't break into a military contractor's facility," she protested. That's federal prison territory, at minimum. I don't have a choice. Commander's dying, and Reynolds has the antidote. Ellie's expression shifted from concern to determination. Then I'm coming with you. I can identify the antidote and administer it properly. Absolutely not, Jack said firmly. This is already dangerous enough. If something happens to me, if something happens to you, Commander dies anyway. Ellie interrupted. I've spent weeks saving this dog. I'm not stopping now. Their argument was interrupted by Commander's third seizure of the day, more violent than the previous ones. Together they stabilized him, but the episode left the dog weaker, his breathing more labored. He's running out of time, Ellie said softly, stroking Commander's head as he lapsed into unconsciousness. We need to move tonight. Jack reluctantly agreed, but insisted they develop a detailed plan. They spent the afternoon gathering supplies and mapping the facility based on satellite imagery. Jack would handle security systems and any personnel, while Ellie would identify the correct medication once they gained access. As evening approached, they loaded Commander into Ellie's SUV, bringing the essential medical equipment needed to keep him stable. They had just finished when the clinic's front door opened and a man in a crisp, dark suit entered. Dr. Montgomery, I'm Agent Trevor Blackwood, FBI. He flashed credentials, his gaze shifting to Jack, then to the medical equipment being loaded into the vehicle. Mr. Winters, I was hoping we could talk. We're in the middle of an emergency, Jack replied, positioning himself between the agent and the SUV where Commander lay. A patient needs specialized care. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. The German Shepherd, I presume the one you claim is a military working dog, reported deceased 14 months ago. The precision of his knowledge confirmed Jack's suspicion that they were being closely monitored. That's right, and he's been poisoned by someone who doesn't want him found. Poisoned, Blackwood repeated, his expression impossible to read. That's a serious allegation. Mr. Winters, do you have proof? Blood work, symptoms consistent with XR-17 exposure, and the fact that Sergeant Marcus Reynolds has been requisitioning the only antidote that can save him. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps. That Jack had this information. I'd like to see that evidence. Ellie stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Agent Blackwood, I'll happily provide you with all our documentation, but right now, my patient is dying. We need to get him to a facility with the proper treatment capabilities. And where would that be? Exactly. Jack and Ellie exchanged glances, before either could formulate a convincing lie. Blackwood continued. Because I suspect you're planning to break into Northeast Security Consultants' training facility to obtain this antidote you believe they possess. His tone remained conversational, almost casual. That would be a federal offense, potentially several. And letting an innocent animal die to cover up crimes isn't, Jack challenged. Blackwood studied him for a long moment. Mr. Winters, I understand your position. You formed a bond with this animal, and you believe he's been wronged. But there are proper channels. He has less than 30 hours, Jack interrupted. Bureaucracy will kill him as surely as the poison. The agent sighed, glancing between them. I can't allow civilians to raid a private facility, regardless of their motivations. Then arrest us, Ellie said defiantly. But you'll have to explain why you prevented emergency veterinary care for an animal with documented poisoning. Her voice wavered slightly. And why you stood by while a decorated military working dog died. Before Blackwood could respond, Commander began seizing again in the back of the SUV. Ellie immediately rushed to attend to him, leaving Jack facing the FBI agent alone. He's dying, Jack said simply, the words catching in his throat. Whatever he saw, whatever Reynolds is hiding, It's worth killing for. I can't let another partner die because someone higher up the chain decided they were expendable." Something in Blackwood's expression shifted. He glanced around the empty parking lot, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Reynolds has been under investigation for months. We suspect he's been facilitating illegal weapons sales through Northeastern security consultants, but we haven't been able to gather enough evidence." "Commander was part of Project Sentinel," Jack said, realization dawning. "He was trained to detect those exact transactions." Blackwood nodded. "And his handler, Colonel Harrington, was getting too close to the truth before his accident. The dog was reported dead, but obviously managed to escape." In the SUV, Ellie had stabilized Commander, but her expression was dire as she rejoined them. That was his third seizure today. The next one might kill him. Jack turned back to Blackwood. "Now you know everything we do. Are you going to help us save him, or are you going to let the one witness who can bring down Reynolds die?" Blackwood checked his watch, then the surrounding area once more. "I didn't see you leave," he said carefully. "And I certainly didn't tell you that security at Northeast shifts at 11 p.m., creating a 15-minute window when the southeast perimeter is minimally monitored." He handed Jack a business card. "When, if you find anything, call this number immediately." As Blackwood walked away, Jack and Ellie exchanged looks of cautious hope. They weren't alone anymore, but Commander's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Even with the information Blackwood had provided, they were running out of time. "Let's go," Jack said, climbing into the driver's seat. "We've got one shot at this." The Northeast Security Consultants facility loomed in the darkness, its perimeter marked by security fencing topped with razor wire. Jack and Ellie parked half a mile away, concealing the SUV behind a dense copse of trees. Commander lay in the back, an improvised IV setup keeping vital fluids flowing into his system. His breathing had grown more labored over the past hour, each exhale carrying a faint whine that twisted Jack's heart. "I'll stay with him," Ellie whispered as they finalized their plan. "You find the antidote." Jack shook his head firmly. "You need to identify the medication. I can handle security, but I won't know what I'm looking for. And if you're caught, then you take Commander and go, contact Blackwood." Ellie's face was pale in the moonlight, but her jaw was set with determination. "We have 28 hours left. Let's not waste them arguing." They approached the southeast perimeter as 11:00 p.m. neared, Jack's trained eye identifying the blind spots in the camera coverage. The security shift change created the window Blackwood had promised, 15 minutes when the guards were focused on handover procedures rather than perimeter monitoring. Jack cut through the fence with bolt cutters, creating an opening just large enough for them to squeeze through. Once inside, they moved from shadow to shadow, making their way toward what satellite imagery had identified as the main laboratory building. "There," Jack whispered, pointing to a modern, two-story structure with reinforced doors. Unlike the other buildings, this one had a keycard entry system and additional security cameras. "That level of security means they're protecting something valuable. Or dangerous," Ellie added. They waited for a patrol to pass before approaching the building from its blind side. Jack examined the keycard reader, then removed a small device from his pocket, a card emulator he'd acquired through one of his less reputable military contacts years ago and had kept just in case. "You came prepared," Ellie observed with raised eyebrows. "Old habits," Jack replied, not mentioning the combat knife strapped to his ankle or the telescoping baton concealed along his forearm. The emulator cycled through frequency combinations for nearly 30 seconds before the door lock clicked open. Jack eased the door ajar, checked for immediate threats, then motioned Ellie inside. The interior was clinically stark white walls, polished floors, the sharp scent of disinfectant hanging in the air. A central hallway branched into multiple rooms, each marked with alphanumeric designations rather than descriptions. "Which one?" Ellie whispered. If I were storing specialized medication, Jack reasoned, I'd keep it climate-controlled, secure, and inventoried. He pointed to a door marked B117 at the end of the hall. That's our best bet. As they moved toward it, a voice called out from behind them, "Stop right there!" Jack spun to find a security guard reaching for his sidearm. Without hesitation, Jack closed the distance between them, disarming the man with a swift movement that spoke of years of close-quarters combat training. The guard reached for his radio, but Jack struck first, a calculated blow that rendered the man unconscious without causing permanent damage. "Help me move him," Jack instructed, dragging the guard into a nearby supply closet. "He'll be out for about 20 minutes. Ellie stared at Jack, seemingly seeing a different side of the quiet veteran for the first time. "You've done this before." "Not something I'm proud of," Jack replied tersely. "Let's keep moving." Room B117 was indeed a secure storage area, its entrance protected by another keycard reader and a numeric keypad. Jack's emulator defeated the first layer, but the keypad presented a problem. 4 digits, he muttered. "Too many combinations to try randomly." Ellie studied the keypad for a moment, then noticed something on the wall nearby, a framed photograph of military personnel with Northeast Security's founding date printed beneath it. "Try 1994, she suggested. The lock disengaged with a soft click. "How did you people use meaningful dates?" Ellie explained. "Basic psychology." Inside, they found what was clearly a pharmaceutical storage room. Temperature-controlled cabinets lined the walls, each containing neatly labeled vials and ampules. "Here," Ellie said, moving immediately to a cabinet marked Restricted Access. This would be where they'd keep specialized medications. The cabinet was locked, but a swift strike from Jack's baton shattered the glass front. Ellie quickly scanned the contents, her trained eye identifying and discarding options until she settled on a small box labeled PMX V17. "This is it, pralidoxime variant, the antidote to XR17. As Jack reached for the box, the overhead lights suddenly blazed to full brightness, momentarily blinding them. When their vision cleared, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed security guards. "Mr. Winters," Reynolds said, his tone almost conversational. "And Dr. Montgomery, I must say I'm impressed by your persistence. Breaking into a secure facility is quite a step up from rescuing strays." Jack positioned himself between Reynolds and Ellie, who clutched the antidote box behind her back. "We know about Project Sentinel," he stated flatly. "We know about Colonel Harrington, and we know Commander witnessed something he shouldn't have." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Commander O, you mean CDR 7529, a valuable asset, though unfortunately prone to behavioral issues, had to be decommissioned." "Decommissioned?" Jack's voice hardened. "You mean poisoned and left for dead because he could identify you as the one selling weapons to private buyers?" Something dangerous flickered in Reynolds' eyes. "You've developed quite an elaborate theory, Winters, but all you've really done is break into private property to steal medical supplies. That's at least 3 federal offenses." "Better than murder," Jack countered. "How many deals did Harrington uncover before you arranged his accident? How many more have you made since eliminating him and trying to eliminate the dog that could identify your scent on those transactions?" Reynolds sighed, gesturing to his guards. "Detain them. We'll let the proper authorities sort this out." As the guards advanced, Jack made his move. Years of combat training took over as he engaged the first guard, a swift combination of strikes that sent the man stumbling backward. The second guard drew his weapon, but Jack was already inside his guard, twisting the gun away and delivering a debilitating strike to the man's knee. Reynolds, seeing his guards neutralized, drew his own sidearm. "Enough! The next person who moves gets a bullet." Jack froze, calculating the distance between them, knowing he couldn't cross it before Reynolds fired. "You won't shoot us," Ellie said suddenly, stepping forward slightly. "Not here. Not like this. Too many questions." "She's right," Jack added, recognizing her strategy. "A break-in that ends with dead civilians, FBI would be all over this place by morning. Your operation would be finished." Reynolds' expression darkened. "You think this is just about me? About some weapons deals? This goes higher than you can imagine. Winters, the kind of people involved don't worry about FBI investigations. High enough to protect you from murder charges," Jack challenged. "Because Agent Blackwood is already building a case. Commander is just the final piece of evidence he needs." At the mention of Blackwood, Reynolds' composure slipped. "Blackwood is involved. For how long?" Jack saw the opening, Reynolds' momentary distraction, and took it. He lunged forward, but Reynolds was quicker than expected, bringing his weapon to bear. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Jack felt the bullet graze his shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin with burning intensity. He staggered but continued his advance, tackling Reynolds to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor as they grappled, Reynolds fighting with the desperate strength of a man who knew what capture would mean. "Jack!" Ellie shouted, pointing behind him. Jack turned to see one of the guards regaining consciousness, reaching for his fallen weapon. Before Jack could react, the guard's hand closed around the grip. Then a blur of motion and a vicious snarl filled the room as Commander, weak but determined, launched himself at the guard, teeth closing around the man's wrist. The guard screamed, the gun again clattering to the floor. Jack stared in disbelief. "Commander!" The German shepherd stood unsteadily, clearly fighting through pain and weakness. His focus locked on Reynolds with a cold intensity that spoke of recognition. Reynolds went pale. "That's impossible. The poison was metabolizing slower than you expected," Ellie finished, moving to Commander's side to steady him. Enough for him to regain consciousness when he heard the commotion. Dogs are remarkably resilient, especially when protecting their handlers. Reynolds lunged for the fallen gun, but Commander was faster, positioning himself between Reynolds and the weapon with a warning growl that rumbled from deep in his chest. "It's over, Reynolds," Jack said, retrieving the weapon himself and training it on the sergeant. "Commander recognized you the moment he saw your card at the clinic. He knows you're sent from those weapons deals you thought no one witnessed." "You have no proof," Reynolds snarled, though his eyes kept darting to Commander with unmistakable fear. "Actually," came a new voice from the doorway, "we have quite a bit of proof now." Agent Blackwood stood with his badge displayed, his own weapon drawn. Behind him, a team of FBI agents in tactical gear flooded into the room, securing Reynolds and the guards. "We've been monitoring Northeast security for months," Blackwood explained as Reynolds was handcuffed, "but we couldn't connect the weapons sales directly to Reynolds until now." He gestured to a small camera in the corner of the room. "Your confession, plus the attempted murder of a federal witness, should be more than sufficient." "Federal witness," Jack repeated, confused. "You mean Commander?" Blackwood nodded. "Military working dogs are considered federal assets. Commander technically belongs to the U.S. Army, and his training makes him a specialized witness capable of identifying specific scent signatures. The courts have established precedent for using trained detection dogs as material witnesses." As FBI agents led Reynolds away, the sergeant fixed Jack with a venomous glare. "You have no idea what you've done. Winters, the people I work for don't forgive interference." "Neither do I," Jack replied coldly, once Reynolds was gone. Ellie immediately administered the antidote to Commander, who had collapsed again. The brief burst of protective energy depleted. "This will take time to work," she warned, expertly injecting the medication. "His system is severely compromised." Blackwood approached as Jack knelt beside Commander, gently stroking the dog's head. "We need to get him to a proper veterinary hospital," the agent said. "I've arranged transport." "Why help us?" Jack asked, looking up at Blackwood. "You could have arrested us both for breaking in." "Because I've been tracking this weapons ring for over a year," Blackwood replied. "When Colonel Harrington started finding evidence through Project Sentinel, we thought we finally had our breakthrough. Then he turned up dead. The project was terminated, and the dogs were either reassigned or reported killed in action." He knelt beside Jack, reaching out to briefly touch Commander's flank. "I'd given up hope of finding direct evidence against Reynolds until you found this survivor." As they prepared to transport Commander, Jack looked around the facility that had nearly become the final chapter in their story. "Reynolds mentioned people above him. How far does this go?" "That's what we intend to find out," Blackwood answered. "And with Commander's evidence and your testimony, we finally have a starting point." Outside, as they loaded Commander into a veterinary transport vehicle, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. Jack watched the weak sunlight illuminate Commander's still form, wondering if they had found the antidote in time or if their victory would still exact the ultimate price. The veterinary hospital in Pittsburgh hummed with quiet efficiency as Jack sat in the waiting area, his injured shoulder freshly bandaged. 48 hours had passed since they'd administered the antidote to Commander, and though the dog had survived the journey, his condition remained critical. The specialized veterinary team had worked tirelessly, monitoring his vitals, administering supportive care, and managing the aftermath of the poison that had nearly claimed his life. Ellie emerged from the treatment area, exhaustion etched in the lines of her face. She'd barely left Commander's side, consulting with the hospital's specialists and overseeing every aspect of his care. Jack stood as she approached, searching her expression for any hint of news. "His blood work is showing improvement," she said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The seizures have stopped, and his neurological responses are getting stronger. It's not a full recovery yet, but—" She paused, allowing herself a moment of cautious optimism. "He's fighting!" Jack released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Can I see him?" Ellie nodded, leading him through the double doors into the critical care unit. Commander lay in a specialized kennel, IV lines delivering fluids and medication, monitoring equipment tracking his vital signs. His eyes, those intelligent amber eyes that had first connected with Jack across the dump site, were open, tracking their movement as they entered. "Hey, soldier," Jack said softly, crouching beside the kennel. Commander's tail thumped weakly against the padded surface, a small but significant sign of recognition. "Don't get him too excited," Ellie cautioned. "His system is still fragile." Jack gently stroked Commander's head, careful to avoid the various medical lines. "You did good." Above and beyond. The dog's eyes never left Jack's face, a bond between them that transcended their short time together. Outside the hospital room, Agent Blackwood was waiting, his customary suit exchanged for more casual attire. "How is he?" he asked as Jack and Ellie emerged. "Getting stronger," Ellie replied. "The antidote is working, but the damage was extensive. We're looking at a long recovery period." Blackwood nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been authorized to brief you both on the developing situation, given your direct involvement." He gestured toward a private consultation room. "There have been significant developments." Once seated in the small conference room, Blackwood placed a folder on the table. "Following Reynolds' arrest, we executed search warrants on multiple Northeast security locations. What we found confirms your suspicions and goes much further." He opened the folder, revealing photographs of weapons caches, documents, and financial records. Reynolds was facilitating illegal weapons sales to domestic extremist groups and international buyers. The operation was extensive, with at least 7 figures in documented transactions. And Colonel Harrington discovered this through Project Sentinel, Jack said, the pieces aligning in his mind. Exactly, Blackwood confirmed. Harrington had documented at least 12 suspicious transactions using Commander and other detection dogs. The dogs were trained to alert on specific chemical signatures present in illicitly manufactured or transported weapons signatures that wouldn't trigger standard detection methods. That's why Reynolds tried to eliminate Commander. Ellie realized he could literally identify Reynolds' scent on the illegal merchandise. But why abandon him at the dump? Jack asked, the question that had haunted him since finding the emaciated dog. Why not just... He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Blackwood's expression darkened. Based on what we've pieced together from recovered documents, Reynolds had arranged for Commander's disposal after reporting him killed in action. The handler assigned to the task apparently couldn't go through with euthanizing a healthy military dog, so he abandoned Commander in a remote area, assuming starvation or exposure would eventually accomplish the same result without direct blood on his hands. Jack clenched his fists under the table, rage building at the callousness of treating a loyal service animal as disposable. And Harrington's death. We've reopened the investigation into his drowning. Initial evidence suggests it was staged to appear accidental. Reynolds was the last person known to have met with him before his death. The magnitude of what Commander had witnessed, what he represented, settled over the room. A loyal military dog, trained to protect and serve, had become the silent witness to corruption that had cost his handler's life and nearly his own. What happens to Commander now? Ellie asked the question weighing on both their minds. That's partly why I wanted to speak with you, Blackwood replied. Officially, Commander remains military property. Once he recovers, he would typically be evaluated for return to service or, given his trauma and exposure to toxins, more likely retired and adopted through standard military working dog channels. Jack felt his heart sink at the bureaucratic response, though he'd expected nothing less. Commander wasn't just a dog to him anymore, he was a partner who'd fought beside him, who'd saved his life in that storage room despite his own weakened state. However, Blackwood continued, a hint of something new in his voice. Given the exceptional circumstances and Commander's critical role in this investigation, I've proposed an alternative arrangement. He slid another document across the table. This is a specialized handler agreement. It would designate you Mr. Winters as Commander's official rehabilitation handler during the ongoing investigation and subsequent trial. Jack stared at the document, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. For how long? Initially for 12 months, with the understanding that pending Commander's full recovery and your performance as his handler, permanent adoption would be recommended at the conclusion of the case. Ellie squeezed Jack's arm, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That's wonderful news. Jack found himself momentarily speechless, overcome by emotions he'd kept carefully controlled for years. Thank you, he finally managed. I'll do right by him. I know you will. Blackwood replied. That's why I pushed for this arrangement. Commander needs someone who understands what he's been through. And frankly, this case needs both of you. Over the following weeks, Commander's condition improved steadily. The neurological damage from the poison gradually reversed, though occasionally his right hind leg trembled when he was tired, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing him. Jack visited daily, often spending hours simply sitting beside Commander's kennel, sometimes reading aloud from whatever book he'd brought, other times just providing silent companionship. 6 weeks after the raid on Northeast Security, Commander was finally cleared for discharge from the hospital. Jack arrived early that morning, a new collar and leash in hand, not the utilitarian military-style equipment Commander had known. but a comfortable leather collar with a small medallion that Jack had specially engraved with the dog's name and a simple inscription, "Above and beyond, always faithful." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Kenneth Phillips, the veterinary neurologist who had overseen Commander's recovery, pulled Jack aside for some final instructions. "He's made remarkable progress," Dr. Phillips explained, "but there's still healing to be done. The physical rehabilitation exercises are crucial, especially for that right hind leg. And the PTSD symptoms, the nightmares, the hypervigilance, they may persist for some time." Jack nodded, understanding all too well. "We'll work through it together." "I believe you will," Dr. Phillips replied with a knowing smile. "It's been my observation that sometimes the best medicine for a traumatized veteran is helping another survivor heal." The drive back to Riverdale was peaceful. Commander sitting alertly in the passenger seat, occasionally turning to look at Jack as if to confirm this new reality was genuine. When they arrived at Jack's cabin, the dog carefully examined each room, his training evident in the methodical way he cleared the space before finally settling on the new orthopedic bed Jack had placed in the living room. That evening, as Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset, Commander emerged from the cabin and settled beside his chair, leaning slightly against Jack's leg in a gesture of quiet trust. The simple weight against his limb felt like an anchor securing Jack to a present he actually wanted to inhabit. "Welcome home, Commander," Jack said softly, his hand finding the dog's head in the gathering dusk. The following months brought changes neither Jack nor Commander could have anticipated. The case against Reynolds expanded significantly as investigators uncovered a network of corrupt officials and contractors involved in the weapons smuggling operation. Jack found himself providing regular testimony, bringing Commander to court sessions where the dog's presence served as a powerful visual reminder of what the corruption had nearly destroyed. Riverdale itself seemed to transform around them. What began as curious whispers about the veteran and the military dog evolved into a community-wide embrace of their story. Sheriff Grantham, initially skeptical, became one of their strongest advocates, often stopping by the cabin to check on their progress and occasionally bringing his grandchildren who delighted in Commander's now recovered strength and agility. Dr. Ellie Montgomery's veterinary practice flourished as news of her role in saving Commander spread throughout the region. She expanded her clinic to include a small rehabilitation center for working dogs, often consulting with Jack on cases involving former service animals. 4 months after bringing Commander home, Jack received an unexpected invitation. The Army's military working dog program was holding a ceremony to posthumously honor Colonel James Harrington for his service and sacrifice in uncovering the weapons smuggling operation. As a key figure in bringing Harrington's killers to justice, Jack was asked to attend with Commander. The ceremony was held at Fort Dix, where Jack found himself surrounded by high-ranking officers, government officials, and media. Commander, wearing a formal military working dog vest that Blackwood had arranged for the occasion, stayed calmly at Jack's side, his behavior impeccable despite the crowds and unfamiliar surroundings. Colonel Harrington's widow, a dignified woman with kind eyes that reminded Jack painfully of her late husband, approached them after the ceremony. "So, this is Commander," she said softly, kneeling despite her formal attire to meet the dog at eye level. "James spoke of him often, said he was the finest detection dog he'd ever worked with." She gently stroked Commander's head, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you for bringing him justice." Jack nodded, unable to find adequate words. Commander leaned forward slightly, resting his muzzle briefly against Mrs. Harrington's hand in a gesture so gentle and deliberate it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "He remembers," she whispered. "James used to let him do that when they'd finished a difficult training day." The moment catalyzed something in Jack, an idea that had been forming since Commander's recovery. On the drive back to Riverdale, he made several phone calls, setting in motion a plan that would transform both their lives. By the one-year anniversary of finding Commander at the dump, Jack had established the Sentinel Program, a non-profit organization dedicated to rehabilitating former military and police dogs and pairing them with veterans struggling with PTSD and reintegration. Using his connections through Blackwood and the publicity from the Reynolds case, Jack secured initial funding and a facility, the renovated eastern section of the old military base near Riverdale, reclaimed for a purpose that brought healing rather than preparation for war. Commander thrived in his role as the program's ambassador, his remarkable recovery serving as inspiration for both the damaged dogs and wounded veterans who came through their doors. His official adoption paperwork had been processed without issue, the military recognizing that his bond with Jack was an essential part of both their recoveries. On a crisp autumn morning, Jack stood watching as 10 veterans worked with their newly paired service dogs in the training yard. Commander sat attentively at his side, now restored to his full weight and strength, his coat gleaming in the morning sunlight. Occasional gray hairs around his muzzle were the only visible reminders of his ordeal. "Look at them, Commander," Jack said quietly. "A year ago, most of these folks had given up. Just like me. Just like you." He glanced down at the German shepherd who had changed everything. "Now look at us." Ellie approached from the administrative building, smiling as she joined them at the fence. As the program's veterinary director, she divided her time between her clinic and the Sentinel facility, overseeing the health and rehabilitation protocols for each dog in the program. "The new group is doing well," she observed, her shoulder brushing against Jack's as they watched the training session. Their relationship had deepened over the past year, moving gradually from friendship to something more, neither of them rushing what felt increasingly precious and right. "They are," Jack agreed. "Thompson's really connecting with Maverick. I wasn't sure about that pairing at first. Sometimes the ones that take the most work become the strongest bonds," Ellie replied, glancing meaningfully at Commander. Jack smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. His journey with Commander had begun in the most unlikely circumstances, a broken veteran finding a discarded military dog, both carrying invisible wounds, both considered expendable by those who should have protected them. Yet together, they had not only survived, but forged something powerful from their shared trauma. As the training session concluded, Jack walked with Ellie and Commander toward the small memorial garden they had established at the center of the facility. A simple stone marker commemorated Colonel Harrington and the other handlers who had lost their lives in service. Surrounding it were plaques bearing the names and photographs of the military working dogs who had passed through the Sentinel program, some who had recovered and found new purpose, others whose injuries or trauma had proven too severe, but who had known comfort and dignity in their final days. Commander paused at the memorial, sitting at attention as he always did when they visited this spot. Jack sometimes wondered what the dog remembered, what connections he made between his past and present. The classified military microchip remained under his skin, no longer a tracking device, but a reminder of a journey that had almost ended at a garbage dump in a forgotten corner of Pennsylvania. "You know," Ellie said thoughtfully, "when you first brought him to my clinic, I thought you were just trying to save a dog." "I was," Jack replied. "But you ended up saving each other." She took his hand, a gesture that still felt new and wonderful. "And then you went on to save all of them." She nodded toward the veterans and dogs making their way toward the dining hall. Jack watched as Commander stood and stretched, ready to continue their day's work. The morning sun illuminated the training fields, the renovated buildings, and the people and animals moving purposefully through what had once been abandoned space. Where there had been neglect, now there was care. Where there had been isolation, now there was community. "Everyone deserves a second chance," Jack said simply, the words encompassing all they had built together, even those the world throws away. Commander looked up at him, those intelligent amber eyes reflecting the morning light, a silent understanding passing between them as they walked forward to greet the day, two survivors who had found their way back from the edge of darkness, guiding others along the path they had forged together. In our twilight years, we often reflect on second chances, those we've given and those we've received. Jack and Commander's journey reminds us that it's never too late to find purpose, even when the world seems to have discarded us, like this loyal German shepherd who was left to die among garbage. Many of us have felt invisible, our value questioned as we age. Perhaps you've been set aside after decades of service, your wisdom and experience overlooked in a rapidly changing world. Maybe illness or loss has left you feeling like Commander, wounded, alone, fighting to survive each day. But remember, your greatest contribution may still lie ahead. Jack found meaning not just in saving Commander, but in creating the Sentinel program that transformed countless lives. Your accumulated wisdom, resilience, and compassion are precisely what our fractured world needs most. Your ability to recognize worth in what others discard is a superpower. Today, I invite you to look beyond your pain, extend your hand to another wounded soul, and discover how healing becomes possible when two broken spirits lean on each other, like Commander. Your scars tell a story of survival that someone else desperately needs to hear.